I'd like to start by asking you all to take a moment to envision an important child in your life. And I'm going to ask that you keep them with you in the back of your mind throughout the remainder of this talk. The average school day for children in the United States between the ages of 5 and 18 is 6.5 hours. Against my better teacher judgment, I'm going to do the work for you this one time to show you that this quickly equates to our children spending just over 15,000 hours of their lives in a classroom. A wise man always told me growing up that knowledge is power. And while I still wholeheartedly believe that, I am beyond disheartened to share that after teaching in the last 10 years at 3 uniquely different schools, that I know that just because you are in a classroom does not guarantee that you are gaining or using any of that powerful knowledge. It's almost a bit ironic that at the same moment that I began my teaching career in 2006, Sir Ken Robinson was brave enough to stand on a similar stage and so eloquently convey the idea that schools are killing our students' creativity. Flash forward 10 years later to today, and I'm here to share that not much has changed. In fact, it may be getting worse. Schools as we know them today are not only destroying our students' most inherent desires to learn through socialize and play, but they're also stripping them of their abilities to think for themselves and to convey any pride in who they are as an individual. We have millions of children on medication so that they can simply assimilate to school. That doesn't mean that our kids are broken. It simply means that there is something very wrong with our current idea of schooling. As a nation, we spend close to $1 trillion on education, one of the highest totals in the world. Yet we still fall within the middle of the pack when compared to other industrialized nations. And parents, they're clearly searching for an alternative. And we can see this here with the outpouring of charter schools, magnet schools, fundamental schools, virtual schools, non-schooling groups, homeschooling groups, unschooling groups, and the list goes on and on. They're clearly understanding that it's time for a change. But if we are going to take a look at what we want to emerge out of our education system of the future, we need to have a similar definition of what needs to be left behind. Education can no longer be the exact same thing for every child. Our children are beautifully unique. The child that you imagine has an entirely different background, interest, motivation for learning, and passions than the child of the person in front of you imagined. And the same rings true for every single child. We can also no longer relate to our children consistently that they are better or worse than every other child around them, and that we are constantly testing, evaluating, and documenting every ounce of their well-being. We know as educated adults that children develop at different rates. So why are we consistently pushing the same for everyone? Education can also no longer be limited to a single set of resources and take place only inside of a classroom. There is an entire world out there full of experiences and real people who can not only teach our kids information, but can provide an entirely different skill set, social skills, that no matter what career path you choose, you will indeed need to know as an adult. Education can also no longer be a passive experience. We know as adults that we don't learn best by passively sitting and seeing the same lesson structure day after day. I don't know about you, but even as the good, smart girl going through school, I just saw it as something that I just had to get through. 15,000 hours of our children's lives are no longer hours that we can simply ask them to just get through. It's clearly time for a change, and the beautiful part is that it's possible. To paraphrase Einstein, things will not change if we keep repeating the same behavior. However, a crisis can be a blessing if we use it to bring about progress. And in today's world, we have no excuses. We have an abundant amount of information readily available at our fingertips. Education will no longer be about accessing information, but about how you apply it. Our children will need to know how to think critically and analyze the information that's presented to them, and then decide how or if at all they plan on using it. Education of the future has to be less about my instruction and more about their construction. The good news is that if we simply adjust our way of work about 2 processes, I believe that we can create a more effective and meaningful education for our students and our world. The first is the process of learning as we know it needs to transform from this linear process with a beginning and end to a circular, ongoing, student-centered personal approach. our kids are now subjected to the same vicious cycle day after day. Either the teacher, the district, or the state designs and manages all of the learning experiences. They pick the topic, they design the activities, and they administer the same information to all kids the exact same way. And then they get to showcase their learning, otherwise known as taking a test on it. However, there's a few things that have changed since this first process was adopted. We've all heard of the internet and the technical revolution, which we've seen examples of here today. And thankfully, these tools allow us to now personalize education for every single child. We can begin by looking at the individual child first, embrace their interests and their strengths, and then design a curriculum around them. The teacher can step back more into a mentorship, Teacher 2.0 role, and then decide together, after the student has provided some insight, on real meaningful activities. And then they can go on and learn at their own rate, their own pace. And the most important part is they can connect to other experts already in the real world using those similar skills so that they can see that indeed what they're learning about has a purpose in life. And then they can decide what they want to construct with that information and share it with people that they love or care about, or maybe even people who need it. When they're invited to own the process, they gain more as a result. And the beautiful thing is that if this process is started from an early age, they can learn one of the greatest gifts of all. They can learn about themselves and the world that they live in. I'd like to share just a few examples of how personalized learning has impacted my class and students that I work with. By connecting to things that kids enjoy, who doesn't like money, they were able to earn money and invest in the stock market. They learned basic math and finance skills and were motivated by tracking their own gains. They then were able to use higher ordered thinking skills and analyze their results and make changes if they were necessary, a skill that you'll need no matter what your career is as you get older. Or by providing choice, my students are always encouraged to run their own book clubs. They choose texts that will meet their needs, they collaborate and set boundaries for what constitutes high quality work, and then they go on to create assignments for each other, some of which are more complicated than the ones that I would have given them initially. Or, when they're challenged to create their own inventions, they analyze problems that they see in their own lives, go on to analyze those and collect information that will help them solve those problems, and then they write to persuade their classmates. Or the most profound and all-encompassing example of how personalized learning impacts and motivates students is when my kids are given the opportunity to positively impact another human being, or potentially their community. When they have the opportunity to choose and take action on their own community service project, they are allowed to choose what they're passionate about. They plan the budget, they outline the steps, and they execute on every single detail themselves. My kids, who struggled with poverty themselves, chose to rally their school and collect resources to donate to a local homeless shelter. My students, who were not even alive during the Holocaust, but had a connection to someone who had a project that they just wanted to help with, rallied our entire community, garnered media attention, and taught others about tolerance. Or my kids, who don't even earn a paycheck, raised over $3,000 in 1 month for a charity that could support one of their classmates. Why? Because they chose. They knew that I supported and believed in them, and they cared. They simply took pride in themselves and executed so that they made it happen. And that's just the beginning. Learning in this process amplifies itself when it takes place outside of school. When the restrictions are eliminated, the numbers are lower, we can access experts more easily, and then we can individualize even further. Meet Brock, my 10-year-old student who excelled in science and math, but who wasn't challenged in the classroom. He went on to meet with our local police department, who shared some of the robotics that they use in their current line of work, another passion of Brock's. He then met with other professionals who taught him CAD and programming, and he went on to use a 3D printer to create a robot that solved some of these problems. Or meet Sammy, Kayla, and Aliyah, who wanted to learn more about their passion of marine science, but because it wasn't in their 4th grade curriculum, they weren't allowed to. We instead went out to meet real marine scientists and other experts in the field, and then they chose 2 products that they wanted to create. Sammy and Kayla decided that they wanted to design their own informative website at the age of 9 to incorporate what they were learning about the evolution of animals and their habitat's destruction, respectively. And Aliyah went on to find her voice. She shared some of the information that she learned, as well as her feelings on animals not being allowed, or should they be allowed to be kept in captivity? And meet Kai, my young astronomer who doesn't learn best by sitting inside a classroom. He was able to join our local astronomy club, meet NASA employees, use telescopes bigger than he was, and actually got to sit in on a real college class. These are the positive experiences that will motivate kids to continue to learn. And it's worthy to note that a lot of these professionals, in addition to many more, had very little connection to myself, my students, or my program. I simply told them that we were learning differently, and I believed that they could relate, and they just wanted to help. Spoiler alert, these children chose their passion, had multiple experiences with experts, reflected on their own learning, and showcased it to their friends and family, all in under 15 hours. Imagine if this process was repeated and expanded upon over the course of 15,000 hours. As my brother and I got older, that same wise but slightly older man went on to add on to his quote, "Knowledge is power, but experience is wisdom." And he was right. But it wasn't until I figured it out for myself in the real world. And the same is true for kids today. We simply cannot ask them to just put their heads down and finish high school or college and then begin experiencing the real world. Our kids are capable of and deserve more than what our current schooling experiences offered. What I've learned from personalizing learning for nearly a decade is that there are 3 things that make a huge difference when you're personalizing learning. The first is that when kids are given the opportunity to choose, that not only propels their learning further, but it allows them to feel a connection within themselves, a pride that will continue those positive experiences for the rest of their lives. Second, kids are willing to take on challenges when they understand that what they're learning about applies in the real world. Connecting information is what creates understanding. And a skilled educator makes a world of difference because they can see how to make those pieces to come together. And lastly, the most important in my opinion, is the understanding that we can all soar when our strengths are acknowledged and when we know that we have someone who supports, encourages, and cares for us. I believe that connecting to ourselves, each other, and our world are some pretty decent connections to start establishing. So, what could happen if these types of connections and we all embraced individualized learning? What if from an early age, our kids were encouraged to follow their passions and to tune into their own hearts and their own awareness? What if kids were consistently asked to apply social skills like empathy, resourcefulness, and adaptability? What if they were encouraged to not only follow their passions, but to connect with other experts who shared the same? Then I believe that we could not only create an entire generation of people who are at peace with themselves, but we could create an entire society of experts. We could have groups of inspired people working in every industry that could amplify progress exponentially because they're doing and working on things that they're passionate about. Honestly, ask yourselves, would you rather work with or raise a child who's been contained for the last decade or 2, or somebody who's been creating, reflecting, and unleashing their potential? This leads me to the second process of learning that I believe that we need to reconsider if we want a stronger education system to emerge. What do we expect our kids to use their education for? Should it simply be to gather a bunch of meaningless facts that they'll never apply? Or should it be an opportunity for them to learn about themselves and the world that they live in? Imagine if we broke down the walls of education and our society and all agreed to connect and support one another. I know that the 5-year-old version of myself who didn't speak one word throughout her entire first year in preschool and has faced some challenges along the way would have never imagined this moment, me standing here talking to the entire world about something that I'm passionate about. But because I was lucky enough to have people who supported and encouraged me, I'm committed to doing what it takes to make sure that children everywhere know their worth and find the greatest versions of themselves. I realize that asking you to make changes to one of your most precious possessions, your child, can be scary. but I am here to ask you, as an educator who is willing to take the risk necessary to initiate change, to also act boldly. No matter if your child is a child who still has 15,000 hours left, or they're already halfway through, I challenge you to operate not out of a place of fear of change, but out of support and connection. It could positively impact their well-being, and it could have a profound effect on all of us in the long run. And hey, Dad, now that I'm the one who has the stage, I've got one more for you to add on to your quotes. Knowledge is power. Experience is wisdom. But courage, connection, and compassion create change. Thank you.